Hello there folks, this is me again, Ferengi on board. Welcome to my YouTube channel, a place where I discuss different topics on psychology from time to time, answering different questions on Quora, like this video's case, discussing topics on spirituality, and well, allowing people to become a bit more aware of certain things that they may not think, they may not be ready to believe, but at least, planting the seeds for a greater consciousness. Now the point about this video of today is the answer that I want to provide to a question on Quora, a question that says when something like, is it good to always show no fear in front of psychopaths? Now the answers that were provided to that weren't necessarily let's say to my liking. I mean, well, I skimmed a bit through one, and well, I don't want to generalize, but let's actually come up with my own opinion. So let's discover a bit about the topic. Now the topic implies a few aspects. Okay, so it's as the question goes, there is fear, there is psychopathy, and well, there is a question that is a bit illogical to me. Okay, should you show, or actually should you never show? Okay, so that never implies a bit of repulsion, okay, because it betrays a bit of fanaticism. When you say never, it's a bit of an extreme aspect, okay, like it's an enforcement, okay, so technically you're not gonna take into account any situation in which you would do what the question, well, the opposite of what the question implies. And we also have psychopathy. Okay, now psychopathy is something that, well, psychiatry tries to a certain extent, and well, it's kind of simply presented up till now, and unfortunately there seems to be some generalization in sciences nowadays, and that's usually what turns me cold, and one of the reasons why I simply disregard most knowledges. The other one being that I prefer finding my truth deep within. Now, the point about psychopathy is that, well, psychopathic people are born so. It's not that you become a psychopath during life. So, the point is, if you hear people presenting and boasting about themselves as being psychopaths, well, in most of those situations, they are not. Now, let's not generalize this, and let's focus a bit on the topic. Okay, so the topic goes around fear and showing fear in the face of psychopaths. Now the question is, why would you actually show fear in the face of a psychopath? And the second question, which is actually the more important one, are you sure that the person or persons facing you, or that would imply fear within you, are you sure that those persons are actually psychopaths? Okay, because psychopathy is something that is only represented by, I can't say, as of what I've been reading, minor changes in the brain. They are quite big, but come again, they can only be detected through specialized brain scans, and considering the fact that a person needs to have a fully developed brain, which, well, the emotional side is said to be the last one developing, and it's around mid-20s that it fully finishes its development. The test has to be taken by that age. Now, it's a lot of situations in which lower functional psychopaths, the ones who usually have much less control over their impulses, usually these folks kind of end up, or tend to end up, more on the wrong side of the law, and they kind of have some trouble with that. So in many situations they can be easily confounded with the other people who end up in jail for numerous crimes, okay, like shoplifting and the such. Also, television tropes do us, do people a general disservice, because many people saying that a psychopath is one of those people who has a chainsaw and a mask, right, and they just butcher people, without any remorse. Now, of course, they may not be aware of that remorse, but everyone who causes pain on others definitely feels that as well, even if they are or they are not aware of that. I'm not gonna dive into this video on life paths and what certain people choose to experience, how much pain they choose to go through. Different spirits come in this world to experience what life is like, being tortured as a victim or different other things, okay, because spirits are curious, because only here can you experience what's here, right? And well, probably in other universes, but the reason is, if some spirits actually chose to come in here, or facets of consciousness as I call them, if they chose to come here, well, they definitely must have some, very stable reasons, okay? Now, to move even further, the point about psychopathy is that you're not going to distinguish a psychopath necessarily. Most people would believe that they have those shark eyes, or psychopathy is also called delayed emotional response. Okay, they have, usually there seems to be, as of science, there seems to be a delay in their emotional responses. Now, it doesn't mean that anyone who has a delay in responding emotionally is necessarily psychopathic. Okay, many empathic people can actually end up so, because when you are abused a lot emotionally, you tend to lock yourself down, because when there is a lot of pain, the brain tends to kill it. Okay, that's why the brain has natural painkillers, which of course they go to a certain extent, but when the brain finds out that the source of a pain is found within itself, it will try to actually force that thing down, and it can actually happen with the emotional side, because the brain can actually shut it down. Well, most likely not entirely, but people can end up as being emotionally drained. They can become emotionally numb, and this is usually not the best thing, because when you become emotionally numb, technically you're kind of dead, because emotions are what manifest and represent your existence. Emotions are a way of the universe and a way of communication with the universe. And when people are on their deathbeds, most likely they will remember their emotions, right? All the pleasant and unpleasant events in their life are remembered, because they're all stationed, okay, in the mind through some emotional attachments, right? If people make peace with events in their life, they can easily end up seeing those events as something normal, something natural, without them being good or bad. Now, psychopaths aren't necessarily those people wearing a face mask, and a chainsaw to butcher and slaughter people. There is a very small part of the psychopathic spectrum, right? They are called the A-listers, and these are, or tend to be, exactly that, okay? But that's just a very small part of the spectrum. Society isn't crawling with psychopaths, okay? Usually they are actually a very small number of the population, and especially much more the higher functional ones. Science says there are some jobs, okay, like for example the CEO job, okay, of a company, that tends to be the number one target of psychopaths, but it doesn't mean now that all CEOs are necessarily natural psychopaths, okay? And well, it kind of takes to be a highly functional one. Okay, so yeah, the point about finding whether someone is or is not a psychopath, that's one of the trickiest things ever, because they're kind of, if not the same with literally anyone else. They just have some emotional delays, let's say, but other than that there is not much of a difference, okay? So spotting out psychopaths wouldn't be one of the easiest things. Now, another point that people have to understand is perception, because perception makes reality, and I've also spoken about this in a previous video, but I will speak it again. When you are born a psychopath, you're technically normal, because that's how you act and behave, okay? It's not an enforcement, right? It's not like a group of people come to you and force you to act in a certain way and you have to give them your power, right? Like, for example, your parents force you to act in a certain way, school does so, your workplace most likely, right? Your, I don't know, in some countries maybe, there is the regime, right, political regime that can force people to act in a certain way directly or indirectly. Television tropes, mass media, music can actually influence everyone a lot. So there's a lot of aspects, right, in the there are a lot of aspects in this environment, okay, that we live in, that can actually shape us, right? So technically, psychopaths aren't necessarily different than the others, okay? They have the same number of limbs, they have the same number of vertebrae. It's like, hell yes, they actually have the same body, right? Like, they have human looks, right? There is nothing, like awkwardly different about them. And we, yes, probably you've come across a lot of those juicy things, like things that make psychopaths look really cool, like, oh my god, they're immune to fear. No, they're actually not. Like, they cannot chemically process certain emotions. Well, I kind of doubt this, and some of the internal answers that I have received about this are a bit against science, because science kind of has an awkward way of generalizing, and where there's generalizing there's a lack of control, and where there's a lack of control there's also a lack of knowledge, okay? So the point about this is I can't truly trust things that generalize life, because life cannot be generalized. Every one individual is unique, right? So to move even further, the question that was asked on Quora has to start with the presumption that you actually know the person intimidating you is basically a psychopath. But the question is, well, there's actually a lot of questions, but one big question would be, why would they want to why would they want to actually intimidate you, right? Like, why would they want to do that? That's a question that has to be taken into account, right? Now, the point about this is, if you were to be intimidated by a psychopath, it's basically the same thing as if you are intimidated by someone else. Now, another point about psychopaths, especially the lower functional ones, is that they are much less inclined to do, emotional revenge compared to, neurotypicals, or, well, people who are not affected by any, I don't know, social disorder or something like that, right? Because psychopaths seem to have a natural more control over their emotions, right? Whereas neurotypicals usually end up being a mess in many situations, because no one trains their mind and especially their emotion, and many bad things in society end up because a lot of people react emotionally, which usually psychopaths tend not to do unless they have been, like brutalized and bullied, and there have been a lot of such situations, okay, that made them shift their feelings and trust and belief towards different opinions. You also have to understand that psychopaths are also kind of the black sheep, most like old souls in a way, because that's not necessarily proof of them being necessarily all souls. They can, why not? But the point is, being so different from others doesn't necessarily put them in the spotlight, because people overreact, right? So if you're in a situation in which a psychopath or any other person would intimidate you, now it all depends on the situation. What kind of situation would it be? Like, would it be a street fight? You're suddenly like a bank clerk, right, and there's suddenly a heist, right, and you're technically being robbed by armed folks. That doesn't mean that those necessarily are psychopaths, okay? Most likely they are narcissists, or most likely they are sociopaths, or I don't know, there can be any other points within, or they can be simply neurotypicals, okay? They're like any type of person can actually commit different types of crimes, and I'm not necessarily speaking about homicides and murder, right? There can be a lot of situations. Now, the question itself will always return a false if we are to enter a bit into programming. Now, why? Because the question asked, is it good if you never show fear? Now, fear will always be present to a certain extent, because fear is a natural way of the body to react, okay? Fear is always an instinct, okay? An instinctive response of the body. Now, as some CEOs say, and some of the more successful people say, fear is something that you shouldn't be afraid of, right? You should let it manifest, okay? You shouldn't be trying to become robotic, because don't try to become something you're not, because you're not doing yourself a service, right? So the points being said, simply show the fear, but you'll always be more intimidating when fear actually manifests, right? It will always manifest, be that you're conscious or not conscious of it. But when you don't let it counsel you, okay? Fear can also be used in a certain state, okay? Because fear has blood pump up a bit more, and just like careful use of hunger, for example, that can actually help, like contrary to most people's beliefs, right? How can it help? Well, it can help very simply, right? When you eat less, okay, you will tend to be hungry, okay? When you are hungry physically, the brain starts working even more in a way, because you're technically in a state of survival, and when you are in a state of survival, you can use this a bit to your advantage, but don't abuse it, okay? Because everything that you abuse is not good, right? And you can use this to your advantage to solve a certain situation. Actually, I've seen this as a response of many successful people. They say they used to eat less because this allows, like with a correct diet, right, with a correct nutrition, they tend to eat less, and some of them actually don't eat a certain day, and when they don't eat, naturally when you get hungry, you tend to work even better than expected, okay? Because most people expect to not be able to work when they're hungry, because those are stories that they make up, and usually, like always, any story you make up is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So while not eating, the hunter instinct triggers, okay, and your brain starts to overclock in a way, because it's entering survival mode, and it's trying to find out all possible solutions, right? And if you can create some little tricks in there, that if you can solve these problems, you're gonna get food, right? Or different little tricks like this, you can actually turn hunger into something better, okay? Fear also can work in a similar way, because like opposed to hunger, fear will trigger much faster, okay? Hunger is not prone to trigger at any given time, right? But fear, in any situation that you would perceive as fear, and you can play with your mind and learn how to control fear in a way, but not necessarily control in being abusive, okay, or controlling, just letting it flow, but understanding that it can actually help you, because fear is first of all an acronym: false evidence appearing real, right? And technically you're creating a story of what can happen, right? You're imagining a future that hasn't happened yet, and you're manifesting fear towards that. But also, fear is a powerful attractor, so whatever you're imagining, it's like you're begging the universe to happen, right? And well, I bet you're also not thankful to the universe that those fears don't happen always, right? Because most likely most of us would have been fucked if that would have happened, right? So the point about fear is that you can actually use it to your advantage in a way, because it pumps adrenaline, it bolsters your thinking, and it can actually make you think and act faster, okay? So in certain situations it can actually be a boost. Now the point about this is, most likely this would be the most useful. You can actually fear yourself a bit when you do certain work, right? So that you can teach yourself in time to become even more razor sharp focused, right? While also cutting down all distractions. Now, should you actually manifest fear in front of a psychopath or any other person? Well, you will always manifest fear, okay? And most likely people like psychopaths will always be able to read it, because psychopathy, as I call it, means mental communication, okay? From psyche, which means mental, and, well, what else can I say? Oh yes, pathia, right, which means communication. Although scientists tend to call pathia as the other meaning in Greek, namely broken, right, or disease, right, a mental disease. And that's kind of a huge disservice to those people, because not like most of them aren't even criminals, okay? There are those lower functional ones that end up, in jail for different crimes. There are highly functional ones that can end up in jail for things, but usually those end up in jail more like, for greater things like, corruption or, legal exploits or the such, because highly functional ones are much more aware, and they always tend to use their minds to understand different situations. Yes, some can tend to be manipulative. There's a lot about that, and like, I don't want to overcomplicate the video. You will always manifest fear, and psychopaths usually are marginalized, or they marginalize themselves because they simply end up not being fully capable of understanding why the others manifest in the way they do. Most likely, many of those actually don't even know they are psychopaths, right? Because when you are born in a certain way, your perceptions are normal to you, because that's what and who you are, right? Like when a daltonist is born, they see green instead of red and red instead of green, right? And it will always be awkward to them that everyone else says, wait, you're, like, you're seeing wrong, but like, that's my kind of normal, okay? So if you've got a problem with that, like, just let me be, right? So fear is always something that you're gonna manifest, okay? And some psychopaths most likely have the ability to feel this within you, because they usually end up getting to read people, because being so different will always imply that they stay kind of, at a certain range, and they prefer gathering information about people, usually a long time before they actually, enter into start communication with those persons, right? And to a certain extent, I can actually attest to this, but I know for sure that I'm not a psychopath, or who knows. But I also know I'm highly emotional, so, you know, I kind of fully distrust science almost, but at the same time, just because you have a few of the traits of a certain disorder or a certain, different neurological and or, psychological function, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily that. Okay, so again, this video was just a bit on this idea, right? And was just an idea to share some of the wisdom of mine, right? Of some of the wisdom I have been acquiring, while at the same time trying to make people understand that questions, when they are asked, they have to see, people have to become aware that everything can be split into so many ideas, so many possibilities, that big questions and generalized questions usually are kind of disregardable, I would say, because you simply can't answer a general question without diving into each and every possibility like I usually tend to. So that's kind of a point, right? You simply can't end up generalizing things or doing this or doing that just because most of the people go in one direction only. Okay, fear is something that your body will always manifest, but as some successful people say, I let fear manifest, okay, but I don't, or let's say it, I feel the fear, but I don't let it guide me, okay? I don't let it counsel me, okay? So fear is something that you have to make peace with, because it is a lesson, okay? Fear manifests from something that you haven't made peace with, and you have to understand that you have to dive deep into that, okay? When you are capable of letting fear flow through you, okay, and showing everyone else that you don't let it counsel you, that is when you truly become intimidating, okay? Because all people will actually try to intimidate you, well, guns, you're probably gonna be somewhat defenseless against guns, but some people will actually threaten to beat you. Some people will probably threaten you with a knife, and usually knives are more deadly than the gun in many situations, because the gun has to be pulled out. It has to be, you have to pull the safety lock, and you have to aim, while the knife is a bit more maneuverable, and while on the streets you never know who's gonna get you, right? Especially if you get in darker deals or you piss the wrong people off, right? So there will be many people that will probably threaten you and bully you, but the point about them is that they are bullying other people because of their insecurities. Now when you show them that you're gonna hold their ground irrespective of what, and you don't let fear manifest you, many times you can actually turn the table without even fighting, because it's quite intimidating in many situations to be the one who can actually have fear visible in their eyes, but they are not affected by it, right? They don't let it counsel them, kind of what psychopaths almost naturally do, right? But from their standpoint, they're also like how to call it, in many situations they can actually be unaware of that, okay? When it comes to their emotions, usually there is a lack of awareness regarding their emotions, but it doesn't mean that they don't actually manifest emotions, okay? Hopefully you liked this video and the type of content that I'm creating. Feel free to see my videos on spirituality, on sociology. Feel free to see videos that I have, even about my playing Heroes of the Storm, usually the Lost Vikings, or some of the videos about the creation and expansion of my video game. You are loved and appreciated. Keep up the good work, and well, all these being said, love yourselves, do the more introspective work, especially now with the lockdowns, and all these being said, take care. Whatever you are doing is the best you can at the right pace for you. You are loved and appreciated. Hugs, and well, Ferenjan Board signing out.